Welcome to Master Your Merger, the podcast for leaders navigating the people side of mergers and acquisitions. Each week, your host Klint Kendrick talks with deal makers, HR leaders, and integration experts to uncover what really works when it comes to people, culture, and performance during a deal. From retaining top talent to aligning leadership, you'll hear real stories and actionable insights from the people doing the work, all designed to help you make your merger work. If you're leading through M&A, this is your weekly playbook.
Welcome to the Master Your Merger podcast. Today's guest is Sondra Kiss. Sondra is the managing partner of Kissinger Group, a boutique consulting firm specializing in complex enterprise transformation. For more than 15 years, her firm has led high-impact organizational transformation initiatives for Fortune 1000 companies, including Amazon, Google, Toyota, and Kaiser Permanente. In the merger space, Sondra and her team have helped companies align structure, culture, and technology through large-scale merger integrations. Today, she'll talk about how AI is reshaping the org design conversation and how leaders may need to rethink the organizational restructuring model during an integration. Sondra, thank you for joining the show, and this is such a timely conversation.
Thank you, Clint. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So Sondra, let's start off. Just tell me a little bit about your journey. How did you get into transformation and M&A specifically?
Oh, the journey. Well, my consulting journey started with a firm up in the Bay Area called M Squared, and I was there for about 10 years and working with large organizations. And my partner and I decided that we wanted to start our own consulting firm about 15 years ago. And what we wanted to do, we were kind of doing everything at the previous firm. And what we decided we wanted to do was to really focus on the high impact areas and the engagements that would be fun and would make a difference. So we said, let's focus specifically on enterprise transformation, large-scale enterprise transformation. And, you know, that cuts across a number of areas, but one of the big areas is structural transformation. And, of course, one of the big triggers for structural transformation is merger integration. So that's the condensed version.
Yeah, fantastic. You know, we're in the process right now with Master Your Merger of putting together an HR M&A competency model. And just yesterday, we were having a conversation about organizational alignment, aligning leaders, aligning org structure. And just as I was talking with some of our thought leaders, org design is hard. And yes. It came up as one of those areas where a lot of people have a lot of facility with the comp and ben pieces that go into the financial model with leadership retentions. And those are difficult areas. But there are a lot of resources out there to guide folks on doing that. But org design often gets short shrift. So why is org design such a critical lever in realizing the value of a merger? And what happens when you treat it like a box-based exercise instead of really a strategic lever?
I love that question, Clint. When you think about, if you start at why does one organization acquire another? There's something thereafter. There's some value that they're looking to acquire. And it can feel like it's a tangible value. Maybe it feels like it's IP. For example, I've spent most of my adult life in San Diego. Qualcomm is one of our few Fortune 500 companies, very well-regarded company. Most people know, or people who know what Qualcomm did and continues to do, is they think of them as an innovation company. And they invented CDMA technology, which allowed us basically to send lots and lots of information in a cellular capacity. So that's modern cellular technology today. And so when I walk through Qualcomm's halls, they have this lobby that is covered with patents. I mean, it is the entire lobby. It's unbelievable. And so you would think that their value is all of these patents. And they have, from CDMA technology to today, they have continued to create all these things. That's why they have all these patents. So if you think about, if I were to want to acquire Qualcomm, I might think, I want to acquire their IP. That's their value. But if I take a step back, I have to think about how did they create that IP? Do I want them to continue to create IP? And that's the people and how they work, right? So if we think of an org chart, or if we think of boxes in an org chart, we're thinking of structure. And structure is only the enabler. It's the people behind it and what makes them innovative in this case, or what makes them able to, what relationships do they have that open new markets for us. So it's a long answer to your question, but I think that you have to start with the value of what a company is trying to acquire and work from there versus starting with an org chart. It's tempting to do that, but it's not the right answer.
Well, and it's just interesting from an HR practitioner's perspective. Sometimes we're told that we have to look at things like boxes on a chart when making like selection decisions and traditional reorgs. But I would argue that mergers are different in that value drivers really do make a difference. So how has that changed the org design conversations you've had when you're saying, hey, let's start with value, not structure? And with that being a shift from more traditional approaches that HR practitioners take to structure, how do you get from a structure-based conversation to a value-based conversation?
Yeah, it's instinctive for people who want to get work done to go straight to structure because it's very tangible, right? And you watch these house flipper shows, and they're hurrying. They're trying to get the most value out by moving quickly. And with integration, we're under a lot of pressure to move quickly. So that's a temptation. The opportunity is that we're trying to do something different when we merge two companies. We're trying to create new value. So if we start with the org charts, we're starting with legacy value. And instead of starting with what the legacy is, which may throw us into old silos and all kinds of other things, we have a fresh start here. And so it's really an opportunity for the HR folks to add value in a way that they might not have been able to add value previously. So it's a huge opportunity to create new value, but you do have to take a step back, and it takes some discipline to do that.
Yeah. Now, I'm very curious, as you're talking about value and structure, I'm wondering, do you do any kind of organizational network analysis when you're thinking about this sort of thing? When I think org structure, I think boxes. When I think organizational network analysis, or ONA, because it's a mouthful, that's when I start thinking about the individual level. So how do you look at the intersection of like org structure design and ONA?
Yeah, well, I like to look at it. I mean, eventually what you're working toward is an operational model, right? I mean, you really want an operating model that is sort of the blueprint of how does this organization create the outputs that it's trying to create. Okay. I like to work backwards from there. What are the outputs that we're trying to create? And then, yes, of course, you have to do an analysis of where your people are. But now we have this overlay of AI, which changes the game completely. I mean, up until recently, AI was something that I said to ChatGPT, do this, and it gave me an output, right?
Okay.
Now we have the advent of agents that are autonomous, and they are going to be like digital humans on the org chart, right? Yeah. So I think we have to start with the capabilities that are required, and then look at the current assets and overlay. Where does AI fit into the picture? And when you have an integration, it's a great inflection point to do that, right? You get to rethink everything.
So let's talk a little bit about AI. You know, when I think about what's going on in AI, I mean, I've heard a few times we're using the worst AI that we'll ever use right now. It's only going to get better from here. But even as it is right now, it's really disrupting the way that we work. And maybe for good, maybe for ill, I think that the jury is still out. But regardless, it's here.
Yes.
How do we need to think about capabilities in this world where AI is emerging and working side by side with humans?
Yeah, well, it's easy to think of it as a thing that's just operating over here. And when we think about capabilities, I guess we want to think about them in a couple of ways. First, where is AI most capable today? And where are we most likely to be using it tomorrow? So you can look across the organizations, and there are pockets where it's adding the most value today. So we need to look across the organizations and think about where it fits. But what is often forgotten, because everybody's focused on, well, what are the use cases? What's often forgotten there, Klint, is that it's not just what it's going to do, it's how it's the ways of working and how we're going to interact, and the decision rights and the handoffs. And so it's part of our operating model now, or it's going to be. So we have to think about it not just in what it can do, but how it fits into the organization.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I hadn't really thought about, if I were redesigning my organization right now, would I give a specific AI agent a box in my org? And I'm just curious, maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of us, but do you see a world where we're doing org design where we've got a box for, this AI agent and that AI agent, and they literally sit on the org chart?
100%.
Wow.
Yeah. I really think and I think it's really close.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I've been thinking, Sondra, really in terms of workflows with AI. I haven't really contemplated, does Bob, the AI agent, have a job on my team? I don't give Bob a desk, but he's got a job. So that's really fascinating. So as you kind of think about this, we've got an AI role, we've got AI workflows. How do you think about that when you're planning an integration? And it seems to me like you've got a couple of moving targets, right? You've got the seller that may or may not be integrating AI into their roles and workflows, and the buyer's doing the same thing. When everything's in this much flux, right? How do you navigate that? Where do you see the biggest impacts, especially when planning an integration of this AI disruption?
That we can look at where most prevalent today. Okay. And that's a good place to focus. So we know that we're seeing a ton of AI in marketing. So it's content development. There's a lot that's where actually sales and marketing is where AI it has the heaviest impact today. And we're also seeing it, of course, in customer service. So that's another area. More and more, we're seeing it in impact finance and legal. Here's reporting, here's research and checking. Back to your question, I think that we have to look at it in terms of the where it fits, and that helps us focus a bit. But you sort of touched on something that's also really important that we haven't talked about yet, and that is about AI maturity, and that when we're putting two organizations together, the likelihood that they're at the same point in the AI maturity curve is almost nil, right? Okay. I mean, one's going to be ahead, and then from department to department, it might vary, right? So, we have one client that it has gone really, really deep in their marketing department, but the rest of the organization hasn't quite caught up. So you sort of have to look at it in terms of maybe start with the maturity level of each of your companies, and then look at where they match up and consider that, and then perhaps function to function, you have to think about where it fits. And so it really is an exercise, again, in patience, because you have to step back and you've got to resist the temptation to just start with where we are. Really want to say, if we were building this business today, how would I build it? Because that's what you're doing.
That's a great point, right? What does my business do? What are the value drivers? Just heading back to the deal thesis that you started with. Know what you're doing, know what your goals are. So I'm really just curious as I'm still kind of stuck on giving Bob a box on my org chart. I'm going to be honest. My brain is a hard time
it's a big thing
wrapping
to wrap
around
your
that.
head around.
Yeah, I'm just thinking maybe I should have named him Hal instead of Bob, but I think you've got to be of a certain generation to get the Hal joke. 2001 for my younger listeners. It's a classic sci-fi movie.
Okay.
Yeah, it was an AI that hated people on the ship.
Thank you for helping me through that.
Yeah, no worries. Goodness. So anyway, as I'm kind of thinking about Bob having a place on my team, as we think about integration, as we think about M&A, I'm going to have potentially the AI assisting me with the org design, as well as needing to consider the AI in the org design and the workflows. When you think about that, and you look at the capabilities that AI brings in, and you're factoring all of that, both with the AI helping you do the lift,
right,
and with the AI in the buyer and sellers, and the potential culture clash that emerges from that.
right.
It just seems like there's so many design considerations that you have to work your way through, Sondra, as you help companies navigate this. So what are the design considerations that you're taking into account in this brave new world of AI?
Well, you need a lens, right? Because like you say, it's super messy. So the lens, I think, does the easiest way to do it is, kind of if you go to Simon Sinek, it's the why, right?
Okay.
Why are we doing this? And what are we trying to create? And then prioritizing the value that we're trying to create and staying true to that. So everyone knows the Disney Pixar story, right? It's one of the greatest merger success stories that ever was, and it's often touted as a great story because Disney left Pixar alone. And for people who don't know this, I'll back up a little bit. So Disney was kind of in a funk when they looked to buy Pixar. And what Pixar was doing was great innovation, and their operating model was very, very flat. And Steve Jobs at the time was still alive, and he wasn't involved, but he was doing the deal with Iger. And so what they did that was successful wasn't just leaving Pixar alone. So the value there was, this is a very creative organization, and the last thing that we want to do is to tamp down that creativity by putting all of our structure and bureaucracy in here. So they were true to the objective of retaining that ethos of Pixar. And the way they did it was they looked at the value that they wanted. There was creativity, there was innovation, there was technology, and they built the org chart, and they said, we, Disney, can really help with distribution, and here's where we fit together. Here's where we really want to, these are the sacred cows. We're not going to mess with this flat organization or this brain trust thing that they do. And so they used that as kind of their lens and guide for making all those org decisions. Now you throw in AI, and obviously it's more complex. But if you think of AI as being one more Bob or Hal, it's a competency. And so if you start with the value and let that drive all the decisions, then you will get to, I think, a good out.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Stepping away from the AI piece for just a moment, you and I have chatted a couple of times, and you used a phrase that I really love, the productivity pothole. So talking about that productivity pothole that happens mid-integration, what is that? How do you help companies avoid it?
Yeah, it's something that we see. What happens when there's an integration, as you well know, Klint, is there's a lot of initial excitement and a lot of activity, and then the deal closes, and then there's confusion, and there's will I have a job, and there's this really messy phase, and where you're integrating two companies for efficiencies and increased productivity, what you usually see is this pothole where everything dips because everybody is distracted. Nobody knows where they're landing. And so it's really important, and a lot of that is attached to the org chart. It's,
Yeah.
I don't know where I fit. I don't know what's going to happen. There's a lack of clarity there. And it's impossible to tell every person in an acquired company where they're going to land on day one. But if there is a way to help people understand that this is a journey and how we're doing it, and to provide some level of transparency there, that gives people, I think, enough relief that they can continue to work and focus. And if you can reinforce the value of the integration, this is what we're here to do, this is why we're doing it, it can be really helpful to keeping people engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally am a really big fan of broad-based incentives for deal milestones.
Love that.
Not been able to do that a lot in my career, just given the nature of the firms I've worked for. But when talking with smaller firms that have more flexibility in their incentive plans, I think it's a great way to get people aligned. And you're going to have a mission, your org is going to look a different way, but we're still all swimming in the same direction trying to achieve this goal.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that that it's not a one and done kind of a thing. It's got a long tail to it, right?
Right.
So if you're incrementally keeping people engaged over time with milestones, I think it's much more effective than trying to do a one and done.
Yeah, that big bang that seems almost unattainable.
Yeah, yes.
So I shifted us a little bit out of org and into compensation for a second, but going back to the org conversation, when we think about organizations shifting, right? And I think a lot of times when I look at M&As, I think about smaller companies being acquired by larger companies. That's 99% of the deal activity out there. They are different sizes. As much as we love to talk about the merger of equals, it doesn't happen that often. So when I think about orgs of different sizes, often you end up with the org chart being, sometimes you lift and shift it, but a lot of times you break up, and functional people like HR and finance start to report into functional people. They don't necessarily keep a business unit intact, or when they do, those functional people still end up with different ways of working, right? I've changed my HRIS, or I've changed the rules around how I'm allowed to go do procurement, or whatever those changes are, regardless of whether the org changes or not. How do you help leaders bring people along when the jobs are shifting? And I'm going to add another twist, Sondra, just given your really, really rich experience in this area. When I think about employees that have been moved from one place on the org chart into another spot on the org chart, like that functional reporting, they're still looking to their old leader for guidance, even though they now report in functionally. Like, that relationship hasn't suddenly ceased to exist because they have a new reporting line. So how do you help leaders bring people along when the jobs are shifting and the boxes are shifting and the tools are shifting?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the truth is that you're not going to bring everybody along,
Sure.
But it's really important to bring the important people along, and to be fair to everybody. So I think and you make a great point about, I'm still looking to my old boss for guidance when I have a new boss. So obviously it's highly disruptive, and I think it's really, really helpful to have a communication platform that is consistent, so that my old boss is saying the same thing as my new boss. So when an integration is done, oftentimes there's a name and a brand for the integration. We're calling it the 1 + 1 = 3. That's a stupid example, but
it's used a lot. I don't know if that's particularly stupid, Sondra. I'm telling you, that's what we rely on in M&A, right? We're building synergies. We're not paying a premium to go out and buy this company at 10x EBITDA because we don't expect 1 and 1 to = 3. So right. I wouldn't sell yourself short on that count. I think the world of M&A relies on that math.
We'll stick with it. 1 + 1 = 3. But if you start with, I keep going back to that value. That value should really drive everything, including the communications. So if this is the reason that we're putting these two companies together and we're better as one. How do we ensure that value is part of our communication platform and that we're cascading it down to everybody in the organization in a consistent way?
Mm-hmm.
So that is really important, that you align all of your leaders on that communication platform and what it means. So from what are the behaviors, these are the actions and these are the behaviors that we're looking for. So I think that's one thing. And just practically speaking, that means that leaders need toolkits that tell them how to manage these things. The other thing is, when I look at change, I look at, as much as you can, you need to make people feel safe, right? Yeah. And safety is around feeling informed, feeling like I have a place I can go and get answers. The second thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that they are involved, that they feel some sense of agency. And when I say they, I mean everybody in the company, that they have some sense of agency, may not be the right word, but that they're part of the process. And so on a practical level, that means workshops and bringing people, okay, this is our new organization. Let's come together. Let's define it together, and let's ensure that everybody understands it and, is kind of aligned. So the leadership has a role in making people feel safe, which is keeping them informed and giving them a consistent message, having them be involved. And then at that point, there is accountability. So this is how we measure our progress. And I think if leaders have the construct to do that, the organization has to give them the construct. They have to say, here are your talking points. Here's what, here's the why, and here's, and here's the organizational model that we like and why. And here is the time that you can have with your team to bring them along and to make them feel part of something new, and to have all these conversations and answer these questions. And then, when they're equipped, then they can do a good job.
Yeah, it's terrific. As you were talking, I just crossed my mind that AI is a great way to standardize communications. There's Beth White with MeBot, and I have chatted a few times. She sat on a panel during one of our conferences, and her firm does chatbots, and they have started programming them to help out with employee questions during M&A. And so that crossed my mind when you're talking about consistent communication. But I also thought, wow, maybe that's where Bob sits on my org chart, right?
Yes.
Is that this becomes a box on the org chart where I've got sort of that first line of questions. Because let's face it, not everybody wants to come talk to the HR guy if they've got a question, right? We're not always, as much as I like to think that I'm a safe person to come talk to, the reality is that's not always the perception of the HR function. So having a sort of neutral intermediary could be a really powerful thing, and a good place for Bob to sit on the integration team.
That. That's one of the things that's one of the big advantages of AI, is it is safe, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to get judged. Nobody's watching me. Most people
right.
at least feel nobody's watching me. And there are now AI mentors. So that would be a fun place to potentially put in a mentor to help you. Maybe each department has mentors that are assigned to certain job functions, and they help those job functions adapt and go through the process. That would be cool.
Yeah, that would be neat. I'm now building the integration team of the future, and we may have a lot of robot help trying to help bring people along.
Absolutely. And we should be leveraging it.
Sondra, one of the things that you mentioned is that you do workshops. How often during these workshops with leaders, as you're getting them aligned, do you sit down with the org charts, and really is that how much time do you tend to spend doing the org design as part of that workshop? What, what percentage of the conversation is the org chart versus other ways of working? I'd love to hear more about these workshops.
Yeah, that's such a good question, because so often those conversations happen after the org chart is done. And the best companies, the smartest companies, have the people in the room as they're thinking about the org chart, and they have a voice. at the table. And it's really important because they're the ones on the ground. They really know how the work is done. Then you have to be clear about your here, we're listening to you, but you may not have decision rights.
Sure.
But ideally, you've got employees involved in the shaping and providing feedback. You have to bring something for them to react to. You can't just start with a blank slate. They have to react to something, right? But ideally, they're involved. That is a separate workshop than, okay, we've decided what the organization is. And now let's talk about how we're going to work together in this new organization. And then probably a couple of workshops. So that's how we're going to work together. That's what our charter is, what the RACI looks like if we want to do that. So they're separate conversations, and they really can be highly charged. So you can't, I think personally it's better to give people some space around it, to not try to jam it all into, we're going to go away for 3 days and figure all this out.
You need to be at least in my experience, and it sounds like your experience matches, you need to give people time to absorb what they've just learned, because sometimes things seem really amazing on paper. And then you step back into the office and you're doing your day-to-day work and you're like, oh, that sounded like such a good idea at the moment. And now I don't think that's a good idea at all.
And that's such an important point, Klint, because it really is this continuous process of we have to adapt and we have to experiment and see what works. We don't know. There is no silver bullet. We're going to try things and then we're going to adapt, right? And so we have to build in the time to learn and adapt and shift.
Fantastic. I think that's really wise. Let it, I like to bake, and I kind of think that is the stage where you can't frost your cake right away. You got to let it cool a little bit or it ends up being a mess. Well, so Sondra, we're getting close to time here, and this has been just a really great conversation. I love when I walk away with a different way of thinking about things, and I certainly have today. For a leader who's listening, that's sitting in the middle of an integration right now, and their thoughts are being triggered by the conversation about their org design, what's one or two simple actions that they could take right now as they're trying to strategically work through their org design decisions?
Well, I think the easiest thing to do is to ask yourself the question, and I mentioned this earlier, but if this were a new organization, how would I do it? So it's really, we're so trained to think about things as they are, and it's really making sure that you have the mindset to sort of throw out the legacy, at least as you're thinking strategically about it, so that you don't rebuild, the dysfunction or something that doesn't mesh. So I think that's probably the most important thing somebody could ask themselves. There's a lot underneath that. It's not a simple thing to do, but I think if you continue to ask that question, you'll end up with the right org design, and also to remember that you're designing for the future, not the past.
Great points. We've talked a lot about AI in the context of M&A. Let's step away from the M&A context for a moment. We're both kind of M&A geeks, and that might be a little bit hard for us, but we're in this massive disruption right now, like we've talked about. So same question. We've got a leader who's trying to figure out how to incorporate AI into their org design. Are the tips the same, or are there some maybe different tips that you would give to somebody who maybe isn't in the middle of an M&A deal,
right,
but is trying to figure out how to incorporate AI into their org design?
I think a lot of it is the same. The difference, though, Klint, is that in an integration, I have sort of a new North Star.
Yeah.
And as in a legacy company adding AI, hopefully my North Star is the same, but I do need to tap into it to make the decisions and to use that as my filtering means to make decisions. But I think that we need to, at any point where there is an opportunity to rethink an organization, we need to think about, where does AI fit in this? Not as a displacement kind of a thing, but as an optimization.
And I think that's how, at least right now, everybody that I've talked to that's thinking about AI is thinking about it. There will be changes to the workforce. I think we'd be foolish to pretend that there aren't. There already have been. My other half is retraining, quite candidly, because his job ended up changing. He was watching AI. He did procurement. He was watching an AI negotiate with another AI contract terms and conditions, right? So each firm had put in their minimum viable or minimum acceptable conditions. And in record speed, they kind of got to the point that both parties could live with without human intervention. So rapid fire negotiation based on minimum principles. So that kind of job's going away. Certain customer service jobs are going away. I just talked about having Bob answer questions from people. That's a potential job for a person that's shifting. So I know that we aren't so naive as to believe that jobs aren't going away, but there will be other jobs that'll be built. We've been here before, right? Steam power, sewing machines, right? Instead of people hand stitching, right? So we know that we've done this before, and that as humans, we like to be busy and productive and do things that add value. So I'm sure we'll sort it out. I think where I was going with this is that we know that that's one of the risks, right? This workforce disruption, this belief that the jobs are going away. When we think about incorporating AI into our organizations, and this, just given the time, probably has to be the closing question, though I could talk to you about this all day. What are some of the big risks and opportunities that organizations have when they're trying to incorporate AI into their org design against that backdrop where we know that some jobs are going away and we don't know what's going to replace those jobs just yet?
Yeah, it's a huge question, and I think it's on everybody's mind. So certainly there are big risks in what it means for our workforce and for our young people who are entering the workforce, for all kinds of people in the workforce. So there's a risk of displacement and disrupting the workforce. There's certainly a risk of, there's a huge amount of fear and feeling threatened with it, right? There's a risk of getting it wrong. There was a big one on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago about how people were interviewing for jobs and they were being interviewed by AI robots.
Well, there's a class action suit right now due to some AI decisions that are being made.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Age discrimination lawsuit. I don't want to name the firm, but big age discrimination suit for algorithm-driven decisions.
It's a bias. Yes, bias is certainly a risk. There's hallucination. There are all kinds of risks. It's evolving technology, and we're in this sort of arms race right now, and so everybody is just slapping it out there as fast as they can, right? Because they don't want to miss out. And that is the opportunity, is that it is, to some extent, it's a democratization of scale. We're a relatively small firm. We can fill up boxes on our org chart where we wouldn't have hired people it's a huge opportunity. And anybody who has watched anything else understands that getting on the bus makes a lot of sense, but it's certainly not going to be perfect.
Yeah, great points. Well, Sondra, thank you so much. This has been a really fantastic conversation. Really appreciate your insights. If folks want to reach out and get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Sondra, Sondra, Kiss, Kiss. They can also visit my website, which is kissingergroup.com. So thanks so much for having me, Klint. It's been great. Lots of fun.
Thank you. And we'll make sure we get those links in the show notes. And when this goes out, we'll make sure that folks have an easy way to find you on LinkedIn as well. Sondra, thank you so much.
Thank you, Klint. Pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Merger, hosted by Klint Kendrick. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone leading through a deal. To explore toolkits, resources, and upcoming programs, including our free roundtables, visit masteryourmerger.com. We'll see you next time.